The desperate signal, the communication array on New Zephyria, crackled with desperate energy as Ambassador Thela adjusted the transmission frequency for the 100th time. Her six-fingered hands trembled as she watched the readings on the holographic display. The parasitic creatures known as the Void Spawn had consumed another outer colony overnight, and the Zephyrian Collective was running out of time. "Ambassador, the Council is demanding an update," her aide whispered urgently. The young Zephyrian's purple skin had turned pale with fear, and his usually bright golden eyes were dim with exhaustion. Thela nodded, without taking her attention from the controls. The galaxy-wide distress beacon had been broadcasting for 3 standard cycles now, sent to every known civilization within 1,000 light-years. So far, the responses had been disappointing. The Altarian Republic offered thoughts and prayers, but no military support. The Centauri Trade Federation expressed deep concern while quietly moving their assets further from Zephyrian space. The Vegan Confederacy simply acknowledged receipt of the message and wished them luck. "Status report on the evacuation fleets?" Thela asked, though she dreaded the answer. 70% of the Outer Rim populations had been relocated to the core worlds, but were running out of space and resources. The Void Spawn are adapting faster than our defensive measures can evolve. They've learned to counter our energy shields and are now feeding directly on our power cores. The Void Spawn were unlike any enemy the galaxy had faced before. They weren't a species in the traditional sense, but rather a collective consciousness of parasitic entities that consumed technology, energy, and life itself. They arrived without warning 6 months ago, emerging from dark space like a plague of living shadows. Each creature was roughly the size of a small shuttle, covered in writhing tentacles that could interface with any technology they touched. Once they made contact, they drained the life force from their victims, while simultaneously learning everything about their technology and biology. What made them truly terrifying was their ability to reproduce exponentially. Every ship they consumed, every station they devoured, every planet they stripped of life became material for creating more of their kind. The Zephyrian military had won a few early skirmishes, but each victory came at a cost that only made the enemy stronger. "Ambassador, we're receiving a response to the distress beacon," the communications officer announced suddenly. "It's coming from the restricted zone." Thela felt her 4 hearts skip a beat. The restricted zone was a quarantined section of space that had been sealed off by Galactic Treaty 2 centuries ago. According to the old records, it contained a single planet inhabited by a species so dangerous that first contact protocols had been immediately suspended. The survivors of the original expedition had been too traumatized to provide detailed reports, only warning that the planet's inhabitants were apex predators from a death world where everything was designed to kill. "Open the channel," Thela ordered, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. The holographic display flickered and resolved into the image of a bipedal creature with forward-facing eyes, prominent jaw muscles, and what appeared to be battle scars on its visible skin. The being wore a dark military uniform with insignia that suggested high rank. Its gaze was direct and unsettling, like a predator evaluating prey. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Fleet," the creature said, in surprisingly clear galactic standard. "We received your distress call. What's your situation?" Thela struggled to find her voice. These were the legendary humans, the species that had been quarantined because they were too dangerous for civilized contact. Everything about this Admiral Chun radiated controlled violence, from her piercing brown eyes to the casual way she held herself, as if ready to spring into action at any moment. "Admiral Chun, this is Ambassador Thela of the Zephyrian Collective. We are facing extinction from an enemy unlike anything the galaxy has seen before. They call themselves the Void Spawn, and they consume everything in their path. We've lost 40% of our territory in 6 months. Chun's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Send us everything you have on these void spawn. Tactical assessments, biological data, engagement records, weaknesses if you found any. You're willing to help us? Phila asked, unable to hide her surprise. Information first, Chun replied, curtly. Then we decide. The data transfer took several minutes. Thala watched nervously as the human admiral reviewed battle footage, casualty reports, and scientific analyses. Chun occasionally asked technical questions that revealed a sophisticated understanding of military strategy and xenobiology. Her follow-up questions were precise, cutting straight to the heart of tactical problems that had puzzled Zephyrian strategists for months. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Chun stood in the war room of the Terran Defense Council. A massive chamber was carved directly into the rock beneath the Colorado Mountains, protected by layers of armor and defensive systems that could withstand a direct nuclear assault. Holographic displays showed star charts, fleet positions, and the accumulated data from humanity's long isolation. For 200 years, Earth had been quarantined by galactic decree. The official reason was that humans were too aggressive, too violent, too dangerous to interact with civilized species. The real reason was fear. The few aliens who had made contact with humanity had witnessed capabilities that challenged their understanding of what sapient life could become. Analysis complete, reported Dr. Kira Okafor, the Council's chief xenobiologist. The tall woman with intricate braids and sharp intelligence had spent decades studying alien species from intercepted transmissions and captured technology. These void spawn are fascinating. They're not truly alive in the conventional sense. More like self-replicating technological viruses with a distributed consciousness. Can we kill them? Chun asked bluntly. Everything can be killed, replied General Harrison Webb, the grizzled veteran who commanded Earth's ground forces. Question is how much it'll cost us. The Zephyrians have been fighting defensively, Dr. Okafor continued. They've focused on containment and evacuation rather than aggressive counterattacks. Their weapons are designed for precision and minimal collateral damage. Very civilized. Asterisk Chun studied the tactical data with the cold efficiency that had made her the youngest admiral in human history. At 42, she had already commanded 3 successful campaigns against rogue AI networks and led the development of humanity's most advanced warships. Her promotion had come after the Titan Rebellion, where she had proven that humans could adapt and overcome any enemy, no matter how technologically superior. Recommendations? She asked the assembled council. We stay out of it, suggested Admiral Blake Harrison, the oldest member of the council. It's not our fight, and breaking quarantine could restart the conflicts that led to our isolation in the first place. Counter-argument, said Dr. Okafor. These void spawn don't recognize borders or treaties. If they consume the Zephyrian collective, they'll have the resources and knowledge to spread across the entire galaxy. Eventually, they'll reach Earth. Let me see the fleet readiness reports, Chun ordered. The holographic display shifted to show humanity's hidden military strength. During their 2 centuries of isolation, Earth had not been idle. They had built shipyards in the asteroid belt, established military bases throughout the solar system, and developed weapons that incorporated lessons learned from studying alien technology. The Terran Defense Fleet consisted of over 300 vessels, from swift frigates to massive dreadnoughts designed specifically for extended combat operations. More importantly, every ship in the fleet was crewed by humans who had been raised on stories of Earth's violent history. They understood war in ways that the peaceful galactic species could not comprehend. Where aliens saw tragedy, humans saw opportunity. Where others sought to minimize casualties, humans calculated acceptable losses. Where civilized species fought to defend, humans fought to win. Captain Rodriguez, status of the first attack fleet? Chon asked. Captain Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward, his weather-beaten face bearing the scars of a dozen battles in the outer system. He commanded the TDS Defiant, a heavy cruiser that had never lost an engagement. 75 ships ready. For immediate deployment, Admiral. Another 120 can be combat-ready within 48 hours. Dr. Okafor, your assessment of Zephyrian biology? They're physically fragile by our standards, but highly intelligent. Silicon-based rather than carbon-based, which means they process information faster, but recover from injuries more slowly. They've evolved on a low-gravity world with minimal predation, so they lack the survival instincts that define human psychology. Chon absorbed this information with the calculating mind of a born strategist. The Zephyrians were asking for help against an enemy that fed on technology and life force. They had tried conventional warfare and failed. They needed something unconventional, something that thought outside the parameters of civilized combat. Needed humans. Council decision. Chon asked formally. The vote was closer than expected. 5 members voted to maintain quarantine. 7 voted to intervene. Chun cast the deciding vote without hesitation. We go, she said simply. Not because we owe the Zephyrians anything, but because this threat will eventually reach Earth if we don't stop it now. Better to fight them on alien soil than in our own system. The orders went out within hours. The largest human fleet in history began mobilizing, drawing ships from bases throughout the solar system. Marines loaded assault shuttles with weapons that had never been tested against alien enemies. Engineers made final adjustments to experimental technologies that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Medical teams prepared for casualties using trauma protocols developed during humanity's bloodiest conflicts. Ambassador Thela received the response 12 hours after her initial request. Admiral Chun's image appeared on the communication screen with the same predatory intensity, but now there was something else in her expression. Anticipation. Ambassador Thela, this is Admiral Chun. The Terran Defense Fleet is mobilizing to assist in your conflict against the Void Spawn. We'll arrive in your system in 72 standard hours with a full battle group. Admiral, I cannot express our gratitude, Thela began, but Chun cut her off. Don't thank us yet. Human military doctrine is different from what you're used to. We don't fight to contain threats or minimize casualties. We fight to win, whatever the cost. Make sure your people understand that. I don't understand? Shun's smile was sharp as a blade. You will. The transmission ended, leaving Thela staring at a blank screen. Around her, the communications center buzzed with activity as news of humanity's intervention spread throughout the collective. Some Zephyrians expressed relief that help was finally coming. Others whispered fears about inviting devils from the restricted zone into their home. High Counselor Vex arrived within the hour, his aged features creased with worry. As the supreme leader of the Zephyrian collective, he bore the responsibility for his species' survival on his shoulders like a crushing weight. Is it true? He asked without preamble. The humans are coming? Yes, Counselor. Admiral Chun confirmed that their fleet will arrive in 3 days. And you believe they can succeed where we have failed? Thela considered the question carefully. She had studied the restricted files on humanity, the classified reports that were deemed too dangerous for general distribution. Humans had evolved. On a planet where the average gravity was twice galactic standard, where the weather systems could devastate continents, where the native life forms included predators that could hunt in organized packs. Everything about their homeworld had been designed to produce the most efficient killers in the galaxy. More troubling were the psychological profiles. Humans didn't just accept violence, they embraced it. They had concepts like acceptable losses and necessary sacrifices that most species found morally incomprehensible. They could make decisions that prioritized victory over individual survival, something that went against every civilized instinct. I believe they can do things we cannot, Thela replied honestly. Whether that will be enough remains to be seen. Unknown to both aliens, the human fleet was already pushing the boundaries of faster-than-light travel, racing toward the Zephyrian system with a desperation that matched their hosts. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the TDS Vengeance, her flagship, watching star patterns shift as they approached their destination at velocities that stressed the limits of their engines. Admiral, we're receiving long-range sensor data from the Zephyrian system, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, the ship's tactical officer. The Void Spawn have accelerated their assault. They're hitting the core worlds now. Chun studied the tactical displays with growing concern. The enemy had adapted faster than expected, learning from each engagement to become more effective predators. They were no longer simply consuming isolated colonies, but striking at the heart of Zephyrian civilization. Time to destination? She asked. 18 hours at current speed, but we're pushing the engines beyond safety margins. Push them harder. The Terran fleet screamed through space toward a battle that would determine the fate of two species. Behind them, Earth prepared for the possibility that their intervention might fail, that the quarantine might be broken, that the galaxy's worst fears about humanity might prove justified. Ahead lay the unknown, where apex predators from a death world would face creatures that consumed entire civilizations. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity went to war. Asterisk Deathworld warriors arrived. The space around New Zephyria shimmered like heat. Distortion as the human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel. Ambassador Thela watched from the orbital command station as 75 vessels materialized in perfect formation, their angular hulls reflecting the light of the system's twin suns. Each ship was a study in functional brutality, covered in armor plating that could withstand direct asteroid impacts and bristling with weapon systems that defied galactic conventions. By the twin moons, whispered High Counselor Vex, his 4 eyes wide with amazement. They're enormous. The human flagship alone was larger than anything in the Zephyrian fleet. The TDS Vengeance stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull studded with missile tubes, railgun turrets, and energy weapon arrays. Escort vessels surrounded it like a pack of mechanical predators, each one built with the same aggressive efficiency. Ambassador Thela, this is Admiral Chun. The communication system crackled, requesting permission to establish tactical command. Granted, Admiral. All Zephyrian forces are at your disposal. Within hours, the human fleet had transformed the system's defensive posture completely. Instead of the careful, measured formations favored by Zephyrian commanders, the humans deployed in aggressive hunter-killer groups. Their ships moved with predatory grace, using asteroid fields and gas clouds as cover, while their sensors probed every shadow for signs of the enemy. Captain Marcus Rodriguez commanded the Advanced Reconnaissance Group from his heavy cruiser TDS. Defiant, his weathered face showed no emotion as he studied the tactical displays, but his brown eyes burned with the intensity of a man who had never lost a battle. Contact, reported his tactical officer. Multiple Void Spawn signatures, bearing 2-7-Mark-4. They're moving toward the third planet. Rodriguez leaned forward in his command chair. How many? 67 individual entities, moving in a coordinated swarm pattern. The Zephyrian liaison officer aboard the Defiant, a young male named Jorik, looked at the humans with confusion. Shouldn't we call for reinforcements? 67 Void Spawn destroyed our entire 4th Defense Wing. Rodriguez smiled, and the expression was not reassuring. Different tactics, different results. Helm, set intercept course. All ships weapons free. The human ships accelerated toward the enemy, with reckless abandon, their engines burning bright. Against the star field, where Zephyrian commanders would have established defensive positions and called for backup, the humans charged directly into combat like warriors from some ancient mythology. The Void Spawn detected the approaching threat and responded with their typical efficiency. The parasitic creatures shifted formation, preparing to envelope and drain the energy from these new opponents. They had consumed thousands of ships using this strategy, learning and adapting with each victory. They had never faced humans before. All ships, execute Protocol 7, Rodriguez ordered calmly. The human vessels suddenly scattered in all directions, breaking their formation in ways that seemed completely random. The Void Spawn, programmed to respond to coordinated attacks, found themselves confused as individual ships, approached from seemingly impossible angles. The first human weapons fired at maximum range, using kinetic projectiles that struck with the force of small asteroids. The Void Spawn's energy-draining abilities were useless against simple metal slugs accelerated to relativistic speeds. Several creatures exploded in bursts of dark matter as tungsten penetrators punched through their cores. Direct hits, reported the tactical officer. Enemy formation is disrupting. But the Void Spawn adapted quickly, spreading out to minimize damage from the kinetic weapons. They began launching their own attacks, sending tendrils of dark energy toward the human ships to drain their power systems. That was when they encountered their first lesson in human military. Engineering got the human vessels didn't rely solely on advanced energy systems. Each ship carried multiple power sources, including primitive chemical rockets and mechanical systems that could function without any electronic support. When the Void Spawn attempted to drain their energy, the humans simply switched to backup systems and kept fighting. Emergency power activated, Rodriguez's engineering officer reported. We're running on fusion cells and chemical thrusters. Perfect, Rodriguez replied. They can't drain what we're not using. All ships ramming speed. The order that followed would have been considered suicide by any civilized military force. The human ships accelerated directly toward the Void Spawn, using their armored hulls as weapons. The TD's Defiant led the charge, its reinforced bow designed specifically for close-quarters combat. The collision between ship and creature sent shockwaves through both fleets. The Void Spawn, adapted for feeding on energy and technology, were unprepared for beings willing to use their vessels as giant hammers. 3 creatures died in the first ramming attack, their distributed consciousness overwhelmed by the sudden trauma. Boarding parties, deploy, Rodriguez ordered as his ship punched through the enemy formation. Assault shuttles launched from the human vessels, carrying Marines equipped for the most dangerous type of combat imaginable. Commander Jake Sullivan led the first wave, his powered armor scarred from a dozen previous battles. The stocky Marine had volunteered for every dangerous assignment in his 15-year career, and his reputation for surviving impossible odds had made him a legend among his peers. Remember, these things feed on energy and life force, Sullivan told his team over the communication system. Keep your power signatures low, and don't let them touch you directly. The human Marines had trained for this scenario using captured alien technology and theoretical models. Their armor was designed with multiple redundant systems, and their weapons included both high-tech energy systems and primitive chemical explosives that the Void Spawn couldn't absorb at the first boarding. Action took place inside a massive Void Spawn collective organism. The creature's interior was a nightmare of writhing tentacles and pulsing energy conduits, but the Marines moved through it with professional efficiency. They used shaped charges to destroy critical systems and flamethrowers to burn away the organic components that connected the creature's consciousness. This is Alpha Team, Sullivan reported as his squad worked deeper into the entity. We found what looks like a central processing node placing charges now. The explosion that followed tore the void spawn apart from the inside, its screams echoing across multiple frequencies as its distributed consciousness died. The remaining creatures in the swarm suddenly lost coordination, their movements becoming erratic and confused. "Target the isolated ones," Admiral Chun ordered from her flagship. The human fleet had arrived just as the first engagement was concluding, and she watched with professional satisfaction as her tactical doctrine proved effective against this new enemy. Dr. Kira Okafor stood beside the Admiral on the bridge, studying sensor readings with the fascination of a scientist observing a unique phenomenon. "Fascinating," she murmured. "They're not just feeding on energy. They're creating a collective intelligence through quantum entanglement. Disrupt the entanglement, and you disrupt their ability to coordinate." "Can we weaponize that knowledge?" Chun asked. "Already working on it. Give me 6 hours, and I'll have a quantum disruption field that should scramble their communications across an entire sector." Meanwhile, on New Zephyria, Ambassador Thela watched the battle with growing amazement. The humans had destroyed more void spawn in one engagement than the Zephyrian military had managed in 6 months of fighting. Their tactics were brutal, reckless, and completely effective. "How are they doing this?" High Counselor Vex asked, his voice filled with wonder. "They're not fighting like a civilized species," Thela replied. "They're fighting like predators." The human approach to warfare was fundamentally different from anything the galaxy had seen before. Where other species sought to minimize casualties and preserve resources, humans calculated acceptable losses and pressed their advantages regardless of cost. Where civilized militaries fought defensive actions, humans sought to destroy their enemies completely. Most importantly, humans seemed to enjoy the challenge. Admiral Chun's reports to her superiors revealed a species that found satisfaction in overcoming impossible odds, that thrived under pressure that would break other beings. "Admiral Chun, this is High Counselor Vex," the Zephyrian leader transmitted. "We are in your debt. How can we repay this service?" Chun's response was characteristically direct. "By learning to fight. These creatures will return, probably in greater numbers. Next time, you need to be ready." Over the following days, human military advisors worked with Zephyrian commanders to restructure their entire approach to warfare. The peaceful species found the lessons difficult to accept, but the results were undeniable. Human-trained Zephyrian units began achieving victories that had seemed impossible just weeks before. Commander Sullivan established a training facility on New Zephyria's largest moon, where Zephyrian volunteers learned human military doctrine. The aliens struggled with concepts like acceptable casualties and necessary sacrifices, but they gradually began to understand the mindset required for effective warfare. "The key is not to think of the enemy as individuals," Sullivan explained. "To a group of Zephyrian officers, think of them as a problem to be solved. What's the most efficient way to eliminate the threat? What resources are you willing to sacrifice to achieve victory?" The philosophical implications troubled many Zephyrians, but the practical results were undeniable. Units trained by human advisors consistently outperformed traditional forces against void spawn incursions. Dr. Okafor's quantum disruption technology proved even more effective than anticipated. The devices, installed on specially modified Zephyrian vessels, could break the consciousness link between void spawn entities across vast distances. Deprived of their collective intelligence, the creatures became vulnerable to conventional weapons. The turning point came during the Battle of the Crystal Nebula, where a massive void spawn fleet attempted to consume the Zephyrian industrial complex. Admiral Chun led a combined human Zephyrian force into the nebula's chaotic environment, using the gas clouds and crystal formations as cover for the most ambitious military operation in galactic history. "All ships, execute Plan Omega," Chun ordered as her fleet approached the enemy concentration. Plan Omega was a human concept that no civilized species would have considered. It involved deliberately sacrificing smaller vessels to create openings for larger ships to exploit. The plan required crews to knowingly fly into certain death to achieve tactical advantages for their comrades. 12 human frigates accelerated toward the Void Spawn fleet, their crews volunteering for a mission they knew they wouldn't survive. The small ships carried experimental weapons designed to overload Void Spawn feeding systems, creating temporary vulnerabilities that the main fleet could exploit. "This is Captain Torres of the TDS Relentless," came the transmission from the lead frigate. "Beginning final approach. It's been an honor serving with you all." The sacrificial attack created exactly the opening Admiral Chun had calculated. The Void Spawn, overwhelmed by the sudden energy surge from the overloading frigates, lost coordination just long enough for the main fleet to strike at their core vessels. The battle raged for 18 hours, with losses on both sides that would have ended most conflicts. But humans didn't think like most species. Every casualty was calculated, every sacrifice weighed against potential gains. When the Void Spawn fleet finally broke and fled into deep space, they left behind nearly 70% of their forces. More importantly, they left behind something they had never lost before: the initiative. Status report, Admiral Chen requested as her battered fleet regrouped. 37% casualties across all human vessels, reported her tactical officer. Zephyrian losses are at 22%, but their effectiveness increased by over 300% compared to previous engagements. Chun nodded with satisfaction. And numbers were within acceptable parameters, and the strategic objective had been achieved. The Void Spawn would think twice before attacking Zephyrian. Space again, asterisk. In the weeks that followed, news of the victory spread across the galaxy. Species that had written off the Zephyrian collective as doomed suddenly expressed interest in reopening diplomatic relations. The humans had not only saved an alien civilization, but had demonstrated that the Void Spawn could be defeated. Ambassador Thela met with Admiral Chun one final time before the human fleet departed. The Zephyrian diplomat had aged visibly during the conflict, but her eyes now held a strength that hadn't been there before. "Admiral, I must ask you something that has troubled me throughout this conflict. Why did your people help us? You gained nothing from this intervention except casualties and the expenditure of resources." Chun considered the question carefully before answering, because that's what humans do. We protect those who can't protect themselves, even if they're strangers. Especially if they're strangers. But your species was quarantined because the galaxy feared your aggressive nature. The galaxy was right to fear us, Chun replied. But they were wrong about why. We're not dangerous because we enjoy violence. We're dangerous because we're willing to pay any price to protect what we consider important. And after meeting your people, we consider you important. The human fleet departed New Zephyria to a hero's farewell, leaving behind military advisors and advanced technology to help the Zephyrians defend themselves. But more importantly, they left behind a changed galaxy. The quarantine around Earth was formally lifted by galactic decree, and humanity was invited to join the Galactic Council as a full member. The species that had once been feared as too dangerous for contact were now welcomed as the galaxy's protectors. Admiral Chun returned to Earth, with a fleet reduced by 40%, but carrying something more valuable than ships: the knowledge that humans had found their place in the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as guardians. High Counselor Vex established the Chun Academy on New Zephyria, where young Zephyrians learned human military doctrine alongside traditional peacekeeping methods. The first graduating class adopted a motto that would have puzzled their ancestors, but perfectly captured their new understanding: peace through superior firepower. The Void Spawn had been defeated, but more importantly, they had inadvertently accomplished something that centuries of diplomacy had failed to achieve. They had forced the galaxy to confront the truth about humanity, that sometimes civilization needed barbarians to protect it from the darkness between the stars. And in that darkness, predators from a death world stood ready to answer any call for help, no matter the cost.